"Run the diagnostics again," he ordered, his voice steady despite the growing dread in his chest. His clawed hand gripped the edge of his command station a little too tightly. The sensor officer, a young Creathian named Pellis, worked frantically at his console. His mandibles clicked nervously as he reviewed the data for the third time. Finally, he turned to face Corthan, his eyes wide with something close to fear. "Commander, the systems are functioning perfectly," Pellis said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've checked everything twice. The signature is confirmed. It's a human battleship. The UNSC Prometheus." The bridge fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Every Creathian officer present stopped what they were doing and looked up. Some froze mid-gesture. Others felt their blood run cold. They all knew what that meant. Humans. Corthan closed his eyes for just a moment, letting old memories wash over him. He had fought them 50 years ago, back when he was just a young warrior fresh out of the academy. Back then he'd been eager for glory, hungry to prove himself. The war was supposed to be quick and easy. Humanity was a minor species, barely worth noticing. They were confined to a handful of primitive worlds on the edge of known space. The Creathian Empire, with its 1,000-year legacy and mighty fleets, would sweep through their territory in a matter of months. Maybe weeks. Took 5 years. 5 long, bloody, impossible years of watching human forces do things that defied every military textbook ever written. They didn't follow any logical doctrine. Their tactics made absolutely no sense until suddenly they did, and by then it was far too late. Corthan remembered watching in horror as humans turned asteroids into improvised weapons, launching them at speeds that should have been impossible. He remembered seeing damaged human ships, hulls breached and bleeding atmosphere, deliberately ramming into Creathian dreadnoughts like ancient Earth kamikaze pilots. They fought with a ferocity that bordered on complete insanity, a refusal to surrender that seemed hardwired into their DNA. The worst part? They kept adapting. Every time the Creathian military developed a counter to their tactics, the humans changed everything. They learned faster than any species Corthan had ever encountered. They took losses that would have broken any other civilization and came back stronger. The war ended in what everyone quietly knew was a stalemate, though the Empire never admitted it publicly. The official records called it a strategic peace agreement. In reality, both sides were exhausted and terrified of what would happen if they continued. A treaty was signed in neutral space. The terms were simple and absolute. Humanity would stay in their quadrant of space. The Creathians would stay in theirs. A buffer zone was established. Neither side would cross it for any reason. Both civilizations would pretend they hadn't been scared out of their minds at the thought of continuing the fight. And now, 50 years later, a human battleship sat deep within Creathian space. Not near the border. Not in the buffer zone. Deep within their territory, having somehow bypassed 7 separate defensive perimeters without triggering a single alarm. It was impossible. Those defense networks were considered the best in the galaxy. Nothing got through them. Nothing. Except, apparently, humans. "How long has it been there?" Corthan asked, his voice tight. Pellis checked his readings again. "Unknown, Commander. It simply appeared on our sensors 4 minutes ago. There's no record of it crossing any of our detection grids. It's as if it materialized out of nowhere." A cold feeling settled in Corthan's stomach. "Open a channel to High Command immediately. Priority 1. Tell them we have a treaty violation. Code Black. Code Black. The highest level of alert. The kind of code that would have admirals and politicians jumping out of their seats across the entire empire." Within minutes, the bridge's main display flickered to life. Grand Admiral Velthus himself appeared, and Corthan instinctively straightened his posture. Velthus was a legend, a warrior who had commanded fleets before Corthan was even born. His crest was fully flared in obvious agitation, the scales around his neck standing on end. "Commander Corthan," Velthus said, his voice grave and carrying the weight of authority. "We've reviewed your sensor data. This is a crisis situation. This could mean war. A real war this time, not a border skirmish. But we cannot afford to strike first without knowing their intentions. The political consequences would be catastrophic." "I understand, sir," Corthan replied. "Approach with extreme caution," Velthus continued, each word deliberate and measured. "Demand an explanation for this violation. Record everything. But do not, I repeat, do not, fire unless fired upon. We need to know what they want and why they're willing to risk everything to be here. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." The channel closed. Corthan turned to his crew, seeing his own tension reflected in their faces. "Navigation, bring us to alert status." Tactical, I want weapons ready but not armed. Communications, prepare a hailing frequency. And someone wake up our diplomatic officer. I have a feeling we're going to need him. He ordered 3 scout ships forward while keeping his battle cruiser at what he hoped was a safe defensive distance. As the scouts approached, everyone on the bridge watched the human battleship with held breath. Any second now it might open fire. It might launch fighters. It might do any number of horrifying things that humans were capable of. Instead, the Prometheus remained perfectly still. It hung in space like a sleeping predator, its massive hull scarred from old battles. All weapons were cold. No targeting locks. No aggressive posturing. No fighters launching from its bays. Then, a simple message broadcast on all frequencies in perfect Cretan. Request immediate diplomatic channel. Time sensitive. Repeat, time sensitive. Corthan felt his secondary heart begin to race, a biological response he couldn't control. Whatever the humans wanted, it was urgent enough to risk everything. Urgent enough to violate a 50-year-old treaty and potentially start another devastating war. And that terrified him more than anything else could have. Because when humans got desperate, when they decided something was important enough to risk it all, that's when they were at their most dangerous. That's when they did the impossible. Corthan took a deep breath and steadied himself. Open a channel to the human ship. Let's find out what they want. She'd barely slept in 3 weeks. Not since New Harmony. Not since Terra Nova. Ma'am, they're establishing a comm link, Lieutenant Tom Riley reported from the communications station, his fingers dancing across the holographic controls. About time, Kate muttered. Put them through. The holographic display in the center of the bridge shimmered and solidified. A Cretan commander materialized, his image crystal clear. His scales were a deep bronze color, almost beautiful in the right light. But his eyes caught Kate's attention immediately. They held the unmistakable look of a veteran who'd seen real combat, the kind of look you only got from surviving battles that should have killed you. I am Fleet Commander Corthan of the Cretan Imperial Navy, he said, his translator rendering his words in flat, emotionless English that stripped away any nuance. You have violated the Treaty of Proxima. Explain your presence immediately, or you will be fired upon. Kate kept her expression carefully neutral, though inside she felt the familiar weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Admiral Kate Morrison, UNSC Prometheus. Commander, we're not here to violate your territory. We're here because something is coming that makes our old war look like a schoolyard fight. Corthan's crest flattened against his skull. Kate had learned enough Cretan body language during the war to recognize skepticism when she saw it. Explain. Kate took a slow breath. She'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times during the journey here, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt heavier than she'd expected. 3 weeks ago, the colony world of New Harmony went dark. Population, 2 million souls. Men, women, children. When we sent ships to investigate, we found nothing. No buildings, no people, no wreckage. Just bare rock. The entire colony had been consumed down to bedrock. She pulled up the footage on her display and transmitted it directly to Corthan's ship. The video files were massive, high-resolution scans from multiple survey ships. The Cretan commander watched in silence as the recordings played out. Desolate worlds stripped of all matter, surfaces that looked like they'd been scraped clean by some massive, invisible hand. Where cities should have stood, there was only smooth stone. Where forests had grown, only barren ground remained. 2 more colonies followed within days, Kate continued, fighting to keep her voice steady and professional. New Harmony, Riverside, and Terra Nova. 6 million people total. All gone. All consumed by an AI swarm we call the Devourers. Self-replicating machines that eat everything they touch. Metal, rock, water, organic matter. They don't discriminate. They consume it all and use the raw materials to build more of themselves. And you expect me to believe you crossed into our territory just to warn us? Corthan's tone was cold enough to freeze helium. This could easily be a pretext for invasion. A convenient story to explain why you violated our borders. Kate's jaw tightened. She'd known this would be difficult, but having him question her motives when millions had died made her blood boil. Commander, my daughter lived on Terra Nova. Her name was Rachel. She was a teacher at an elementary school. She had a 3-year-old son named David. My grandson. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word before she regained control, forcing the emotions back down where they belonged. I watched the surveillance footage of that swarm reaching her city. I watched it consume the school, the houses, everything. So no, this isn't a damn pretext. This is me trying to prevent the same thing from happening to your people, even if we've been enemies." The bridge had gone quiet. Her crew had heard parts of the story before, but never quite like this. Never with this much raw pain in her voice. She transmitted another data package, her fingers stabbing at the controls harder than necessary. "These are our sensor logs, tracking data, and projected trajectory. The swarm is heading straight through your sector toward your core worlds. They'll reach the Valdric sector in approximately 6 hours. Maybe less." Corthan reviewed the data silently, his alien features impossible to read now. The seconds stretched out painfully. Finally he spoke. "Even if I believed you, Admiral Morrison, I have my orders. The Prometheus must leave Crethean space immediately. We will investigate these claims through our own channels." "Commander, you don't have time. This conversation is over." The channel closed abruptly, leaving Kate staring at empty air where the hologram had been. She turned to her tactical officer, a broad-shouldered man named Jake Carter who'd served with her for almost a decade. "Well, Jake, that went about as well as expected." "What's the play, Admiral?" Jake asked, concern evident in his voice. Before Kate could answer, the sensor station erupted with urgent alerts. Warning lights flashed red across multiple consoles. "Contact!" shouted Ensign Amy Park, her voice rising with panic. "Multiple subspace ruptures at the edge of the sector. Mass signature is, oh God." She went pale, her hands trembling slightly over her console. "Ma'am, it's them. The Devourers. They're 3 hours early." Kate's blood ran cold. 3 hours early meant they'd accelerated, possibly detected the concentration of ships in the sector. It meant everything was about to go to hell faster than she'd planned. She opened a direct channel to Corthan's ship, not waiting for protocols or permission. She knew he'd see the same sensor readings on his end. "Commander Corthan, I know you can see what we're seeing. They're here. Right now. You can either waste time fighting us or you can fight with us. Choose fast." The channel remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Kate could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Every second of delay meant the swarm got closer. Then Corthan's voice came through, grim and resigned, carrying the weight of terrible understanding. "Admiral Morrison, what are we facing?" Corthan watched from his command deck, his claws digging into the armrest of his command chair. The swarm's leading edge reached the nearest Crethean border station, Outpost Theta 9. He'd served there once years ago. Good people staffed that station. Families lived there. The station's commander, a veteran named Telric, broadcast a distress signal on all military frequencies. His voice was steady, professional, even in the face of what was coming. Then the station opened fire with every defensive battery it had. Dozens of energy beams lanced out into space, brilliant lines of destructive power. The energy beams tore through thousands of individual devourers. They exploded in small flashes of light, like tiny fireworks. For a moment, Corthan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the humans had been wrong. Maybe these machines weren't as dangerous as they claimed. Then he saw the reality. For every devourer destroyed, 10 more surged forward to take its place. The swarm didn't slow down. It didn't hesitate. It just kept coming like a metallic tide. Within minutes, the first devourers reached the station's hull. Corthan watched in growing horror as the station's outer armor began to dissolve. Not melt. Not explode. Dissolve. The metal simply broke apart at a molecular level, turning into raw matter that the machines absorbed and processed. Composite armor that was designed to withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons just came apart like wet paper. "Sir, we're receiving footage from the station's internal cameras," his communications officer said, her voice shaking. "Don't show me," Corthan said quietly. He didn't need to see it. He knew what was happening. The Devourers were consuming everything. Metal, equipment, and yes, the organic crew too. Everything was being broken down into base components and absorbed to build more machines. The station's distress signal cut off abruptly mid-word. One moment Telric was calling for reinforcements. The next there was only silence. "All stations beyond the fourth perimeter are gone," Corthan's tactical officer reported, his voice shaking badly now. "Outposts Theta 9, Theta 12 and Gamma 6. No survivors. The swarm is advancing at 0.3 light speed. 0.3 light speed. That meant they'd be on top of the fleet in less than an hour." Corthan straightened in his chair, forcing his fear down into a deep place where it couldn't interfere with his duty. "Battle formation Theta 7, he ordered, his voice carrying across the bridge with the authority of 30 years of command. "All ships prepare to engage. Weapons free on my mark." His fleet responded with practiced precision. 12 heavy cruisers and 40 escort ships moved into a traditional Cretan defensive formation. It was textbook Imperial Navy doctrine, refined over 1,000 years of warfare. Tight, coordinated, with overwhelming firepower concentrated in carefully designed killing zones. Nothing got through a Theta 7 formation. Nothing. Behind them, the Prometheus moved into position without being asked or ordered. The human ship slid into a support position off the fleet's left flank. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Kate watched the Cretan formation taking shape with a critical, experienced eye. She'd seen this formation before 50 years ago. She'd seen it succeed. She'd also seen it fail. "Jake, they're setting up for a standard Imperial engagement," she said to her tactical officer. Jake Carter studied his own displays, his expression grim. "Those formations worked great in the war," he said quietly, almost sadly. "Until they didn't." "Exactly," Kate agreed. "Tom, open a channel to Corthan." The Cretan commander's image appeared on the display almost immediately. "Admiral Morrison, we do not require human assistance." "Commander, those formations won't work," Kate interrupted, her tone urgent. "The Devourers adapt. They learn from every engagement. You need unpredictability. You need chaos." Corthan's crest flattened, and what Kate had learned was stubborn pride. "The Imperial Navy has defended the Empire for 1,000 years. We know how to fight. We don't need tactical advice from humans." Kate bit back a sharp response that would have felt good to say but wouldn't help anyone. "Good luck, Commander." The channel closed. Kate turned to her crew. "All right, everyone. Battle stations. They're going to learn the hard way. We'll be there to help pick up the pieces." The battle began with a thunderous salvo from the Cretan fleet. Every cruiser and escort ship fired simultaneously, creating a wall of energy that lit up space like a second sun. The coordinated firepower was impressive, overwhelming, beautiful in its deadly precision. The swarm's forward elements disintegrated under the assault. Hundreds of thousands of Devourers exploded, their tiny forms unable to withstand the concentrated energy. For a few glorious seconds, it looked like the Crethians would hold. Their formations were working. Their doctrine was sound. Then the swarm adapted. Kate watched it happen in real time on her tactical display. The individual machines began moving in chaotic, unpredictable patterns instead of the straight-line approach they'd used initially. They scattered, regrouped, and scattered again. They flowed around the defensive fire like water flowing around rocks, finding gaps in the formation that shouldn't have existed. "They're learning," Amy Park whispered from her sensor station. "They're actually learning during the battle." 3 Cretan escort ships on the outer edge of the formation were swarmed simultaneously. The Devourers hit them from multiple angles at once, overwhelming their shields through sheer numbers. Within seconds, their hulls began to dissolve just like the border station. Reforming formation, Corthan's voice came over the open military channel, but Kate could hear the strain in it now. But the swarm had already learned the pattern. Every time a Cretan ship fired, the Devourers predicted the targeting solution and moved before the beam arrived. Every coordinated maneuver was anticipated and countered. The tight formation that was supposed to be an unbreakable defense became a liability. Ships couldn't maneuver freely without risking collision with their neighbors. The Devourers pressed harder, sensing weakness. They were no longer attacking randomly. They were hunting. Corthan's flagship shuddered violently as Devourer units latched onto the outer hull. Alarms blared throughout the ship. "Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, someone shouted. "We're being eaten through." Kate watched the Cretan fleet beginning to crumble and made her decision. No more waiting. No more watching. Time to show them how humans fought. "Tom, all hands to battle stations." "Jake, prep protocol Darwin." "Amy, plot an intercept course through the densest part of that swarm." There was a moment of shocked silence. Then Amy's voice came back, small and uncertain. "Ma'am? Through the swarm?" Kate smiled, the expression fierce and determined. "You heard me, Ensign. Right through the middle. Let's show these machines what crazy looks like." The Prometheus surged forward, engines flaring bright, heading straight into hell. Engineers from both species worked frantically to repair the damage while in transit. There was no time to dock, no time to fully assess the problems. They had to fix what they could on the fly because the clock was ticking and the Cretan homeworld was running out of time. On the Prometheus, Kate walked through the engineering section, her boots clanging on the metal grating. The smell of burned circuitry and hot metal filled the air. Sparks showered from overhead as welders worked to patch hull breaches. Her crew worked alongside Cretan technicians who'd shuttled over in the past hour, and the cultural clash was immediate and painfully obvious. No, no, no. A Creathian technician named Riken waved all four of his arms in pure frustration, his scales flushing a darker color. The power coupling must be installed according to specification. This random arrangement will cause cascade failures throughout the entire system. Chief Engineer Mike Davis, a stocky man with grease-stained coveralls and oil smeared across his face, didn't even look up from the tangle of cables he was working on. His hands moved with practiced confidence, connecting wires in patterns that probably looked chaotic to anyone who didn't understand his method. Random arrangement? Mike said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. This, random arrangement, is keeping your power grid stable. Your specs don't account for battle damage, pal. They assume everything is working perfectly. Improvisation leads to system instability. Riken insisted, his mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. Buddy, our entire ship runs on improvisation, Mike replied, finally glancing up with a tired smile. That's why we're still flying and not floating dead in space. Riken opened his mouth to argue further, but Kate intervened before the argument could escalate into something worse. Riken, trust the chief. He's kept this ship together through worse situations than this. Mike, be nice. He's trying to help. Both of them muttered reluctant agreement, though neither looked particularly happy about it. They went back to work, still eyeing each other with suspicion. Kate continued her walk through engineering, noting similar scenes playing out throughout the section. A human technician and a Creathian specialist were arguing about the proper way to seal a plasma leak. Two pilots from different species were debating navigation protocols in increasingly heated tones. The language barriers didn't help, even with translators. Similar scenes played out throughout the entire combined fleet. Creathian officers struggled with human crew members who constantly questioned orders and offered unsolicited suggestions. In Creathian military culture, you followed orders without debate. In human military culture, questioning bad orders could save lives. Human pilots, in turn, were frustrated by Creathian fleet coordination protocols that left absolutely no room for individual initiative or creative thinking. It should have been a disaster. Two military cultures that were fundamentally incompatible, forced to work together under desperate circumstances. Yet slowly, grudgingly, they began to find common ground. The human technicians started to appreciate the thoroughness of Creathian engineering standards. The Creathian officers began to see the value in having crew members who could think independently when situations went sideways. Respect was growing, one small interaction at a time. Kate found herself on a secure channel with Corthan several hours into the journey, discussing strategy for the defense of Kreth Prime. His image appeared on her private screen, looking as tired as she felt. My fleet can provide the coordination and heavy firepower, Corthan said, reviewing tactical data on his end. But your people have something we lack, the ability to adapt in real time. To think creatively under pressure. Kate nodded slowly. And you have something we lack, she admitted, feeling the weight of those words. Logistics and supply coordination. My ships are fast and creative, but we burn through resources like wildfire. We're not built for sustained operations. There was a pause in the conversation, a moment of comfortable silence between two warriors who understood each other better than either had expected. Then Corthan spoke more quietly, his voice taking on a thoughtful tone. Admiral, may I ask you something personal? Go ahead, Commander. 50 years ago I fought against your species, Corthan said, his eyes distant with memory. I was young then. Eager. I watched human forces do impossible things, things that defied all military logic. You turned defeats into victories through sheer stubborn refusal to accept reality. We thought you were either insane or possessed some secret technology we didn't understand. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. But it wasn't insanity or technology, was it? It was something else. Kate leaned back in her chair, considering how to answer. This was important. This moment mattered. Commander, humanity spent most of our history fighting ourselves, she said slowly. We nearly destroyed our own planet multiple times. Wars, environmental collapse, nuclear weapons. We came close to extinction more than once. But we learned something from those mistakes, something that got beaten into us through centuries of suffering. What did you learn? Corthan asked, genuinely curious. That survival requires 3 things, Kate said, holding up 3 fingers. Cooperation even with people you don't like. Adaptation because the universe doesn't care about your plans. And the willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. When we went to the stars, we brought those lessons with us. We had to, or we wouldn't have survived. Even for your enemies? Corthan asked quietly. Kate met his eyes through the screen. Especially for our enemies, Commander. Because today's enemy might be tomorrow's ally. And extinction doesn't care about old grudges or hurt pride. It just comes, and it takes everything if you're not willing to work together. Corthan was silent for a long moment, absorbing her words. Then he spoke again. There is something you should know, Admiral. Your intelligence was correct. We've been investigating while en route. We have concrete evidence now that a third party, the Syndral Combine, weaponized the Devourers. They hoped both our civilizations would exhaust ourselves fighting the swarms, leaving them free to expand into our territories. Kate felt cold fury building in her chest, a rage so intense it almost made her hands shake. 6 million of my people died as part of someone's political game? They will answer for it, Corthan said firmly, his own anger evident in the way his crest stood fully erect. But first we save my homeworld. Then we deal with the Syndral together. Kate nodded grimly. Agreed. Together. The word hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either had expected. The Prometheus led the charge, its scarred hull gleaming in the light of Kreth Prime's sun. Human and Krethian ships followed in a hybrid formation that shouldn't have worked but somehow did, blending Imperial discipline with human chaos. Energy weapons lit up the void like a second sun, turning space into a light show of destruction. All batteries fire at will. Jake Carter shouted from the tactical station, his voice hoarse from hours of combat. Fighter wings engage pattern Alpha Charlie random. There was a moment of confused silence on the comm channel. Then a bewildered voice came through from a Krethian fighter wing. Pattern Alpha Charlie random? Commander, that's not in our tactical database. It means make it up as you go. Jake replied with a wild grin. Keep them guessing. Don't let them predict your movements. The first swarm reacted to the assault immediately, flowing like liquid metal to surround the attackers. The individual machines moved with terrifying coordination, each unit anticipating where the others would go. But the combined fleet didn't fight like either the humans or Krethians alone. They fought as something new, something the swarm had never encountered before. Krethian cruisers formed a solid defensive wall, absorbing the brunt of the assault with their heavy shields and thick armor. Their coordinated fire created deadly kill zones where nothing could survive. Human ships darted through the gaps like minnows between rocks, their erratic movements disrupting the swarm's patterns and preventing the machines from adapting to any single strategy. Kate watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction, her eyes tracking a dozen different battles happening simultaneously. They were holding their ground. Barely. Ships were dying on both sides, but they were holding. Status of the home fleet? She asked, her voice tight. Amy Park checked her sensors, her face pale in the glow of her console. Still engaged with the second swarm near the planet, ma'am. They're buying us time, but they won't last much longer. Casualties are at 60%. Kate studied the battlefield hologram floating before her. 2 massive swarms. 2 nexus points coordinating millions of individual killing machines. Destroy the nexuses, kill the swarms. Simple in theory. Impossible in practice. Unless someone was willing to pay the price. Jake, pull up the last protocol, she said quietly. The tactical officer turned pale, the color draining from his face. Admiral, that's a one-way trip. The ship will be dead in space. We'll be sitting ducks. I'm aware of the consequences. Prep the systems. Ma'am? That's an order, Lieutenant. Jake's hands shook slightly as he entered the authorization codes. Around the bridge, the crew fell silent. Everyone knew what the last protocol meant. It was the option you only used when there was no other choice. Protocol ready, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Admiral, it's been an honor serving with you. Kate smiled sadly, feeling the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. Tell me that after we survive this, Jake. We're not dead yet. She opened a direct channel to Corthan, knowing this might be the last conversation they ever had. Commander, I'm initiating the last protocol. It'll destroy both swarms, but the Prometheus will be defenseless afterward. Completely powerless. I need you to cover our approach and protect us when we go dark. What does this protocol do? Corthan demanded, concern evident in his voice. We're going to turn our entire reactor into a directional electromagnetic pulse, Kate explained, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. It'll fry the nexus points and cascade through both swarms like a virus. But it'll also fry every system on my ship. Life support, weapons, shields, everything. You'll be helpless, Corthan said slowly, understanding dawning. The residual devourers will tear you apart before you can restore power. This is suicide. I know. That's why I need your fleet to shield us. We do the killing blow. You keep us alive afterward. There was a long pause. Kate could almost hear Corthan thinking, weighing the options, calculating the risks. Then his voice came back, filled with fierce determination. All Crethean ships, formation Delta Prime. We protect the Prometheus at all costs. Any ship that fails in this duty dishonors the Empire. The combined fleet shifted like a living thing. Crethean cruisers formed a protective envelope around the human battleship as it began its death run toward the first nexus point. The formation was tight, almost claustrophobic. Devourer units swarmed the formation like angry hornets defending their nest. Crethean shields flared brilliant blue and died. Hull plating melted and peeled away. Ships began to fall, consumed or crippled, but others immediately moved in to fill the gaps. Kate gripped her command chair as the Prometheus shuddered under repeated impacts. The deck plates rattled. Sparks showered from damaged consoles. Hold steady. We're almost there. First nexus in range. Jake reported, his voice tight with tension. Kate took one deep breath. Fire. The Prometheus's reactor went critical in a controlled cascade, every safety system deliberately disabled. Every ounce of power channeled into a single devastating electromagnetic pulse that erupted from the ship's bow like a newborn star. The pulse hit the first nexus point and detonated it in a brilliant flash. The explosion cascaded through the swarm, unit by unit, as the entire network collapsed. Millions of devourers went dark simultaneously, falling from space like metal rain. But the pulse didn't stop there. It arced across the battlefield, guided by the Prometheus's dying systems, and struck the second nexus point with equal devastating force. Both swarms died in the span of heartbeats. The Prometheus went dark. Emergency lights flickered weakly, then failed. Life support dropped to backup battery power. The mighty battleship hung in space as dead as the machines it had just killed. On the bridge, Kate pulled herself up from where the final shockwave had thrown her against her chair. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead. Damage report, she gasped. Reactor offline. Weapons offline. Shields offline, Jake reported, checking systems with shaking hands. We're running on battery backup. Ma'am, we're completely defenseless. Through the viewport, Kate could see thousands of residual Devourer units, damaged but still functional, beginning to swarm toward the defenseless ship. Then Crethean vessels moved into position, forming a shield wall with their own bodies between the Prometheus and the remaining threats. Energy weapons cut down the scattered Devourers with surgical precision. Corthan's voice came over the emergency comm channel, warm with relief. Admiral Morrison, you have made quite the habit of terrifying my people. Stand by for rescue. We're sending repair crews. Kate laughed, the sound slightly hysterical with relief and exhaustion. We're not going anywhere, Commander. Can't exactly fly away right now. 6 months later, the Prometheus looked like a different ship. Fully repaired and upgraded with advanced Crethean technology, it patrolled the border between human and Crethean space. But the border itself had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a wall designed to keep enemies apart. Now it was a gateway, a place where two civilizations met as friends. Admiral Kate Morrison stood in the observation deck, watching through the wide viewport as Crethean and human fighters practiced joint maneuvers. The pilots had gotten good at working together, their formations seamless and beautiful. Fleet Commander Corthan entered quietly, carrying 2 ornate containers of liquid. I believe you humans call this sharing a drink? Kate accepted one of the containers, examining the intricate designs etched into its surface. What is it? Crethean ceremonial wine. It symbolizes trust between warriors who fought side by side. They touched containers together in an awkward gesture that made both of them smile despite themselves, then drank. The wine was sweet and strong, warming Kate's throat on the way down. You know, Corthan said after a moment of comfortable silence, when you first appeared in our sector, the High Command was absolutely convinced it was the beginning of another war. They thought you'd come to finish what we started 50 years ago. And now? Kate asked. Now we understand the truth. Your appearance wasn't an act of war. It was an act of mercy, even if you won't admit it. Kate shook her head, watching the fighters dance through space. It was survival, Commander. Nothing more noble than that. Humanity learned a long time ago, through hard experience and bitter mistakes, that we're stronger together than apart. Even with old enemies. Especially with old enemies. Perhaps that's wisdom the rest of the galaxy needs to learn, Corthan agreed thoughtfully. The Syndrome Combined certainly discovered that lesson the hard way. The Joint Human Crethean Task Force had indeed brought the Syndrome leadership to justice 3 months ago. The trial had been broadcast across every inhabited world in the sector, a clear and unmistakable message about the terrible cost of playing games with civilizations. "Commander, I have to ask you something," Kate said, turning to face him. "That first day when we appeared in your sector unannounced, you asked me a question. Why was a human battleship in your territory?" "I remember," Corthan said, his crest rippling with what Kate had learned was amusement. "You never let me finish my answer." Corthan's expression grew thoughtful. "Very well, Admiral. Why was a human battleship in our sector that day?" Kate looked out at the stars, at the human and Crethean ships flying together in perfect harmony, at the fragile but growing alliance they'd built from the ashes of war and tragedy. She thought about her daughter Rachel, her grandson David, and the 6 million others who died to bring everyone to this moment. "Because you needed us to be there, Commander," she said softly. "You just didn't know it yet." Corthan considered this in silence, then nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "And now?" Kate smiled, genuine warmth in the expression. "Now we're not just in your sector. We're at your side, where we should have been all along. Where we'll stay." Outside the viewport, the stars shone bright on two civilizations learning to trust again, learning to build something better than what came before. And somewhere in the darkness between those distant stars, other threats were surely watching and waiting. But this time whatever came next they would face it together. As it should be.